Hello OTCers, and today we're going to talk about Xabi Alonso, because Xabi Alonso and Leverkusen are in a really unusual position. Certainly unusual for Leverkusen under Alonso, who've been really a steamroller since October 2022. If you look since he took over, the various stages of Alonso that we've talked about before, it's like the three eras of Elvis. The fact that they were battling relegation first, and then they made themselves competitive. They made themselves European. Then they made themselves title challengers / winners. There was no real gap between the two. They just became challengers and winners at more or less the same time last season. That incredible unbeaten season and the DFB Pokal win, getting to the final of the Europa League. And this season, defending their title, even though they're 8 points adrift from Bayern at the top, it's never felt as if it slipped out of their control. They've looked largely very, very good in the Champions League, but there's a but coming, obviously, and that but is the 3-0 defeat away at Bayern Munich in the Champions League last week, which seems to have changed everything, really. Now, you might remember, if you watched it on television, or indeed you were there at the stadium, I don't know, it was certainly clear on the television pictures, seeing Florian Wirtz and Jeremy Frimpong, two of their main players, having a kind of animated discussion. And it wasn't clear whether they were shouting at each other or just shouting into the ether out of frustration. They'd both been substituted. It was in the last 10 minutes of the game. Leverkusen were down to 10 men and down 3-0. So staring down the barrel of elimination even before Tuesday's return leg. And of course, we've seen Leverkusen author some incredible comebacks under Alonso. This would be one to beat them all, I think it's fair to say, if they were able to come back on Bayern in the second leg of this Champions League tie. And it finished with Wirtz using his two hands to cover his face. He couldn't believe what had happened. Now, Wirtz is not going to be involved, actually, in this return. In the second straight defeat against Werder Bremen at home at the Bayern Arena at the weekend in the Bundesliga, he damaged his ankle quite badly. He's going to be out for several weeks, not for the rest of the season, as they initially thought might be the case, because it was clear straight off that it was a bad injury. So Alonso is going to have to think of a different solution without his key player, the guy who unlocks the door on so many occasions for them. And I guess it's not really about the Wirtz injury, though. It's about how Alonso can really stir the hearts and minds of those players ahead of what looks from the outside to be an absolute mission impossible. As we've said, Leverkusen have overcome so many obstacles and got through so many situations that you thought were impossible to negotiate before, that if you'd have asked 3 weeks ago, you'd have said, okay, well, it's difficult, but maybe it's doable. But it's not just the volume of the score in the first leg against Bayern Munich that has really shaken the faith. I think it's the manner of what happened. And in these last two games, and I think you have to group the two of them together, the defeat at Bayern and then the defeat against Werder Bremen at the weekend, Alonso's choices have really been under the microscope. Now, of course, his choices might have been under the microscope before. You think about various other moments where they've come out the traps poorly. You think particularly away in the Europa League at West Ham last season, where they could have been 2-3 down after 45 minutes. The way that they've changed games late on, I mean, it points you to a fact that, of course, Leverkusen are incredibly resilient, incredibly resourceful. They have a great bench. It also underlines the fact, if we think about it, and we never really do think about it because we always think about the end point rather than the middle or the starting point, that Alonso has made mistakes before. Of course he has. Every coach has. And those substitutions that have changed games for them, and you think normally about Patrick Schick coming on and scoring in the 94th or 96th minute or whatever, those are a reaction to things that have gone wrong, things that have needed to be corrected. So it's not as if Xabi Alonso has never made a mistake, and he's always been quite open about that. He's very different to a lot of leading man coaches in the European game, in that he's, without being vulnerable, quite open about the fact that he's on a process, that he's still learning, that there will be mistakes, that there are moments where his philosophy isn't everything. And he's never put his philosophy ahead of the team. He's always said, it's down to the players. It's the players that are doing this. He's never sought excuses when they've had injuries. He's someone who understands that not everything is going to go right. But what went wrong in Munich in that first leg was particularly notable, because they went in with the same sort of tactics that they've used in the last couple of games against Bayern. So going in without a natural striker or a fixed point centre forward. Going in both those last two games, the away game in the Champions League against Bayern and the game against Bayern that they played in the Bundesliga, that they thoroughly dominated at the Bayern Arena in February, a game that, of course, we covered extensively on OTC and here on the OTC YouTube channel. They went into both of those games with Patrick Schick and their other main guy, Victor Boniface, on the bench, which was a bit of a leap. But Alonso's been quite clear about he likes not giving Bayern that fixed point to work with, to keep them guessing with the movement of forwards, whether that be Wirtz in an advanced position, whether that be Nathan Teller, whatever the solution he chooses to go with. And in the first leg, he went with Teller and Adli up front. And it really didn't work. Now, it worked in terms of the game in that Bundesliga game that they played a few weeks before at the Bayern Arena. But, of course, they didn't have the guy to finish off the chances. They only brought on Patrick Schick in stoppage time. They didn't bring on Boniface at all. And maybe that was the difference between them making it a really competitive Bundesliga, because, of course, they could have closed the gap at the top to 5 points rather than the 8 that it is at the moment, and them not closing that gap. So you wondered if they would do something a little different in the away game against Bayern, or if Alonso would do something a little bit different. But he didn't. He chose to go the same way. Now, this was surprising for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because they couldn't get that result over the line in the Bayern Arena. And the other thing is, it's almost been better for Leverkusen, and certainly I would say in an away game against Bayern in the Allianz, to sit deep and absorb the pressure, really. They've proved themselves quite good at that. They proved themselves good at that at the away game at the Allianz Arena, in which Bayern had all of the game, but they were largely kept at arm's length, and it took a long-range goal from Alexander Pavlovic to get Bayern a point on that day. And particularly as well with the fact that some of those key players, like Wirtz, like Frimpong, as we talked about before, and Granit Xhaka, who, of course, is a great tactician but not blessed with an enormous amount of pace, why you would push up on Bayern and then maybe leave space behind, exposing yourself to the possibility of picking up cards that would have kept those three guys out of the second leg, always seemed a little bit risk inherent. And, of course, the fact they conceded that early goal to Harry Kane and then felt that they had to try and push a bit more, that left a bit of space behind. Of course, there were individual errors that really undermined what Leverkusen were trying to do. And, you look at the Kovac error, the goalkeeping handling error that led to the Jamal Musiala goal, the really needless penalty conceded by Edmund Tapsoba, from which Harry Kane made it 3-0. They undercut what Leverkusen were trying to do, but Leverkusen, I felt, never really gave themselves a chance in the game, from the fact that they were a little bit too open, and Bayern were able to really make the most of that. Now, if that was a missed opportunity, you can also say the game against Werder Bremen at the weekend was a missed opportunity, because clearly both of these teams, Leverkusen and Bayern Munich, had their eyes on the second leg at the Bayern Arena on Tuesday. So there were 10 changes to the 11, of course, 1 or 2 enforced in the case of Vincent Kompany for the home game against Bochum. And Bochum, they're one of the worst teams in the Bundesliga. Despite those changes, Bayern led 2-0 early on. But then, improbably, they managed to go on and lose the game 3-2. Now, what this meant, with Bayern really taking their eye off the ball, is that Leverkusen had an opportunity finally to close that gap at the top to 5 points instead of 8. But they never really looked like taking it against against Werder Bremen at the weekend. And even though you can look at the numbers and say, well, they had a lot more shots, they had a lot more possession. You can say Michael Zetterer in the Werder Bremen goal had a good game, but he didn't have to have the game of his life. And they were largely able, Werder Bremen, who I think you could say one of the better of the bottom half teams, but nevertheless a bottom half team in the Bundesliga, were able to keep one of the Bundesliga's best at arm's length, and that never really should have been possible. Now, the interesting thing is we talked about Xabi Alonso's capacity for self-analysis. Now, he talked afterwards about everything went wrong today. He said, it was a bad performance, I made bad decisions, which is the sort of frankness we've come to expect from Xabi Alonso. But it's something that he also could have been saying if you took a little clip of that post-match press conference and put it after the Bayern game. I think you could have said, yeah, I agree with that. I think he did make some questionable decisions in this game. So not only is he going to have to respond to that in the second leg against Bayern this week, and they need to make a good fist of it, even if it's almost impossible for them to go through, especially without Florian Wirtz. They will have to rethink how they're going to score the goals to at least make it difficult for Bayern. Now, you would assume that one of Schick and Boniface will come in. But I think in terms of where Xabi Alonso's going next, this is absolutely fascinating because we know he has nothing really to prove by Leverkusen. He's overachieved to an extraordinary extent, proved himself the best young coach in European football. And I think you would be hard-pressed to find a European football fan or observer or indeed board member of any of the biggest clubs in Europe who doesn't think he's going all the way to the top. And we assume that he will probably end up at Real Madrid next season. Now, of course, there's a difference between the expectation at Real Madrid and the expectation at Bayer Leverkusen. So what here is like a point of interest that we're discussing over the last couple of games, maybe a minor irritation, maybe a footnote in what Xabi Alonso has managed to achieve at Leverkusen. This last couple of games would be an absolute crisis at Real Madrid, which would threaten his future, which would threaten his job. So how he responds to this is really, really interesting. Like I said, I don't think it's just about, and it's so often the case in the Champions League, it's not just about the end result because it's a cup competition and only one team can win it. It's about the manner. It's about the manner in which you show yourself, in which you perform, in which you hopefully push the other team to the limit as well. Because we know that Bayern, in their own way, have had their own little jitters before this game with this result against Bochum, even with a much changed team, and even going down to 10 men when Joao Palhinha was sent off just before half-time. They should have been able to put Bochum away, when actually Bochum were nearer scoring a fourth goal to seal their win than Bayern were equalising there as well. Just how Alonso manages to respond this week, I don't think it's going to make any difference to whether they go and win the Champions League, because I think they are going out this week. It won't probably make any difference to them winning the Bundesliga because they missed that opportunity to close the gap. And I can't see between now and the end of the season Bayern losing 3 more games than Leverkusen will. And they'll probably go on to win the Pokal, and they'll go off into the distance with a pat in the back, as he very richly deserves for his brilliant work there. But I think it's an interesting look at how he might grow into his next job and how he might respond to other setbacks that he's going to suffer under probably even greater scrutiny than he's experiencing at the moment. Thanks for joining us as always. Remember, the podcast, get on your favourite podcatcher. OTC is available every Thursday with me, Dr. Adebayo, and guests. Also every Friday, Ask OTC, where we answer your questions on anything you want on European football. You can get in touch with us on the socials and we'll answer them on there, or of course below the line here, and we'll see you next Monday.